Hi, so we're gonna be doing a little bit different video tonight. This is my dad,
Nolan Mickelson.
and I'm Omar. We wanted to do this video because, well, we wanted to talk about U2, the Irish rock band. We're pretty big fans of them, and yeah, I guess they have a new album of reimagined versions of already existing songs that they've done called Songs of Surrender. Each member of the band, there's four of them, has picked 10 songs that they would redo in a more updated, stripped back style. It's also St. Patrick's Day. It is, and that has some significance because the band are from Ireland, and we just thought this would be a good idea for a video. But basically, what we're doing is we're sharing our decisions on how we rank each of their 14 studio albums. I know my dad also likes some other live albums as well.
I was thinking today, 40 songs coming out tomorrow, their popular song 40, and this is going to be their 14 studio albums, including Rattle and Hum, which we know is kind of a hybrid live album, studio album. I thought before we start with the 14 albums, we could mention some of the other works that they have that are not included in the rankings. Wide Awake in America is one of my favorites. My favorite album of theirs, it's a live album, is Live Under a Blood Red Sky, filmed at Red Rocks in Colorado. So we know there's also some songs of theirs that didn't make any of these 14 albums. Ordinary Love is a favorite of mine. My favorite all-time song of theirs is Bad, filmed as part of Live Aid.
Yeah.
It's like a 17-minute version of theirs. So
I'm also pretty partial to the version of Bad from Wide Awake in America.
Yeah.
That's honestly my favorite version of the song.
Yeah.
I guess we'll go ahead and get started. We ranked each one of their albums and each one of their songs. I have an entire spreadsheet. Each one of their songs, out of 10, we ranked, and then we tally up the average ranking of each one of those albums. So from the top, goes from, I don't like to say worst to best because in my opinion they don't have a terrible album, but they have some that weren't as strong as the others. My least favorite is their 2017 album, Songs of Experience. I remember when it came out, and I was very surprised at just how far removed from the band's original sound and their alternative roots and their classic rock roots they had come to, where they're basically making blandly structured verse chorus bridge chorus pop songs, sticking to a basic formula and not adventuring very much from it. My dad's pointing out here that I gave it a 5.4, and my favorite song on the album I gave it a 7 out of 10, and that was their last song on the album. It was 13, There Is a Light. Another thing, I think there were some better versions of the songs, either in the way of remixes, or the song that Kendrick Lamar was featured on, American Soul. In my opinion, there's a much better version of that song on his album that he also released in 2017, on the song XXX, which featured U2. And their appearance was more of like an interlude of the song, and it was a much better version of the exact same song with some of the same lyrics, but done way better. And it was unfortunate to see that some of the more lackluster versions of those songs were on the album.
My least favorite is not Songs of Experience. My least favorite is from 1997, Pop. I gave it a 3.6. It just doesn't work with me. I'm more of an old school U2 fan.
3.6, that's pretty low.
Yeah.
You probably would say the 5.4. My rating was pretty nice.
Well, I did give a couple of their songs a 7 on that album. Discotheque, Staring at the Sun, and I gave some of their songs on that album the lowest ranking that I gave any U2 songs. 2 or 3 of the songs on that album I gave a 1. So the only thing I will say about Pop is that my wife and I got to see them in Salt Lake City, on the Pop Mart tour. I'm wearing my 107.5 The End long sleeve t-shirt that I got. You can tell it's been hanging on the hanger in the closet because it's got the hanger marks on the sleeves, but it does say U2 right up here, I believe. And it talks about a few of the other bands that I love: Total Sprocket, REM, Talking Heads, and so forth. And now we'll go back to your number 13.
I also want to point out there was only one song that I really, really enjoyed from my album, and there was only one song I think you really, really, really hated on Pop.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
And in speaking of Pop, that was my second least favorite, second to last favorite U2 album, which I actually liked a little bit more. I gave it a 6.2, which I think my dad will laugh at that. I'm pulling up the spreadsheet here that I made. There were some songs that I also really disliked, but my thing about Pop is it was created with some different producers and some different collaborators that U2 had never worked with before, and I feel like U2 was kind of starting to lose their creative control, and lose their grip on who they were. That's where you get songs where they're steering more in the direction of Moby. So they're steering more in different musical directions and experimenting with different sounds, which I respect in some areas, because there were some songs that I actually really enjoyed, and the outro to the album was my most appreciated song on the album. That is Wake Up Dead Man, which is almost like a spiritual, like a religious spiritual hymn, but like with a dark twisted edge to it, where Bono is admonishing Jesus to return to earth so he can make the earth what it once would have been, and he's very hopeless and lost, which I feel like is where U2 was on this album. They were kind of lost, and they had lost what made them a great band for the time being. I mean, they would come back later with some great albums too, but Pop, number 13, my 13th favorite.
My 13 is Zooropa from 1993. Obviously, you can tell that was not my favorite era of U2. And I gave Zooropa a 5.4. A lot of twos on that album for me. A highlight might have been The Wanderer. I give it an 8.
Great song.
And also Stay, Far Away So Close.
Great song.
Johnny Cash is someone that I grew up listening to. I grew up on a dairy farm, and we listened to country music in the barn. And Johnny Cash was one of the people that I remember listening to growing up. So for me, I don't think there's a whole lot to say about Zooropa. A little strange to me. So that's my 13, and I'm going to give it a 5.4.
My number 12 pick is Songs of Innocence. It's their 2014 album, which, yeah, so the album was released in 2014, and it was released on every iPhone for free, which was a very controversial marketing move for the band, who, even in their Pop Mart days where they were tackling themes such as commercialism, almost betrayed that idea that commercialism is bad by, kowtowing to it. And I gave it a 6.8. Like I said, it has that commercial, sleek, almost mall pop sound on some songs, a little bit of dad rock. I use that term not in a bad way, because, most of the members of U2, I believe, are dads. And, I grew up listening to U2 because of my dad, because he kind of put me onto them and their music. But this is where they were really, if they hadn't already gone through one in the 90s, really going through kind of a midlife crisis and a kind of not sure where to go. And there are some great songs on it, and I appreciate the production from Danger Mouse, who I love his work with the Black Keys and Gnarls Barkley, and he does some interesting things here, such as the tracks "Raised by Wolves" is not a bad song, and the album actually, I feel like, gets a little bit better as it goes on, but it's still not one of their best works, and so I gave it a 6.8.
My number 12 is your number 14, which is Songs of Experience from 2017. what can I say about that one? I do like some of the songs on there, but the quality just isn't what it was on their other albums.
You gave it a 5.8. The album is a 5.8.
Yeah, the album is a 5.8. It rings clear to me what they're trying to say. Kind of a political time for them. Yeah, number 12 for me, Songs of Experience. Now, interesting that we both have the same number 11.
Yeah.
So I'll let you start on.
We'll both
Or
talk
number
about this
11.
one in the same segment. I gave No Line on the Horizon a 7.2, and my dad gave it a 5.9, I believe. And they're both our pick for number 11. The album was released in 2009. It was first album that they dropped that I vividly remember because they had premiered the artwork for the album on a late night talk show, and as soon as they did, it just got a bunch of laughs from the audience. It's a very blank, bleak view of a beach, and it's a very, there's a straight line that goes across the image, which is, I believe, what the album title is referencing. Is there's no line on the horizon. It's almost like the gray sky blends in with the gray sea. When you're listening to the album, it very much feels gray. It's not a bad album by any means. There are a lot of great songs on it, and it just kind of feels a little muddy, the album, and it feels a little colorless.
So I remember the day I bought the CD. I was in Laredo, Texas. I bought the CD, listening to it in the work truck, and I was kind of like, what is this? But I listened to it a lot, actually. And I do have 3 songs on there that I gave an 8 to. I gave Breathe, Go Crazy If I Don't Go Crazy Tonight, and also Magnificent. I really do like that song, Magnificent, but again, for me, it's an 8. Good songs, not great songs. And not a whole lot else that I can say about No Line on the Horizon.
Well, I do want to clarify. I gave 2 songs on the album a 9, and this is the first time where I've done something like that. I gave Moment of Surrender, which is a 7-minute, almost a progressive pop song, with some interesting instrumental passages and some interesting lyrics. And White as Snow, which was a song that you two were actually kind of tinkering with, a song that was wintry and kind of dark, and talked about the war at the time in I believe it was Afghanistan. For the soundtrack for the movie Brothers with Tobey Maguire and Jake Gyllenhaal, they ended up going with a different song called Winter, which again is a great non-album track. But this song also tackles the similar themes of a soldier just lost in the wasteland that is just plunged into this war. And this was a very timely album, again, kind of a political album, especially on some other songs like Cedars of Lebanon. But it was both our pick, both me and my dad's pick for number 11.
Your number 10.
My number 10 is Zeropa. It's an album that my dad already mentioned, and that is another very electronic, very experimental album, much like pop. In my opinion, it's a step above pop. I gave it a 7.4, and it has that wonderful closing track with Johnny Cash. There's also,
You gave Wander a 10. So
I did. That was a 10.
Mhm.
Like I said, that's a beautiful song.
Mhm.
Some of the, there are some bumps in the road. Babyface is a very almost kind of a creepy song. Dirty Day, take it or leave it. It sounds kind of like something you two would have done for another album, and kind of feels out of place on this album. A lot of people don't care for the album so much, but I feel like it's not too bad once you understand the context and the themes that they're trying, this world that they're trying to build for the album, where it's a dystopian, over commercialized future where children growing up to basically have no future, and it's just a very hopeless, bleak place. And but there's still a lot of flashing lights and crazy noises going on in the background, and that's very much what the album sounds like.
My number 10 is your number 12, Songs of Innocence. I gave it a 6.7. So I remember sitting at our kitchen table when we lived in Corpus Christi, Texas, listening to that album for the first time.
Me too.
And I wanted to like that album so much because it had been a while since they'd come out with anything. And the first time I listened to it, I did not like it. But kind of like with a lot of things, if you listen to it more and more, it grew on me quite a bit. There are some songs on Songs of Innocence that I do really like. I gave Every Breaking Wave a 9. I love when they play it live. I love when they play the piano on that, maybe more of the acoustic version. I gave also Song for Someone a 9. But the problem is there's just a few songs on there that are 4. And that sure brought it down quite a bit in my book. So not a whole lot else to say about that album for me. And now again, we have the same on number 9 for us. So,
and I do want to say we start getting into the territory now where there's a lot of ties, and so my number 9 and number 8 picks are both 8.1s, and once we get past your number 9 picks, your number 8 and number 7 picks will both have the same number.
Yeah.
So this is where we kind of had to make a decision as to, even though they have the same rating, which one is better. Even if that makes no sense at all, that's basically the decision we had to make.
Yeah.
And my number 9 pick is the band's full-length debut from the year 1980, long before I was even a thought, is Boy. And it's kind of what brings me back to what I said earlier about the band's midlife crisis. This is where the title really makes a lot of sense, because Bono and The Edge and Larry Mullen Jr. and Adam Clayton, they were all young boys and just trying to find a way out of their Dublin neighborhood and make it in the world. And the very first song is almost like a jumping off point from their parents. It's a song about Bono's mother, I Will Follow. It's a classic song that opens the album. I gave it a 9. And as we go from there, we get a lot more post-punk rock tracks, some instrumentals such as Into the Heart and The Ocean that are okay, but there's some weaker spots on the album. I gave it an 8.1, and I even gave one of the songs a 10. That is Out of Control, which was just, it encapsulates probably what childhood to young manhood is supposed to feel like, especially at this time, which I can't really say for sure because I wasn't born yet, but it was definitely what I imagine made me fall in love with the band.
It was the first album, one of 2 albums that I listened to, because again, growing up on the farm, I want to say it was 1984. I remember I was driving a tractor, probably baling hay or something, and we had a cassette deck in the tractor, and we were told not to bring cassettes into the tractor and listen to them because we had to listen to the machine. We would sneak music into the tractor, and my brother Sean had given me a tape which he had listened to, which my brother Stan had given to him, and on one side was War and on the other side was Boy. And so this was my first introduction to U2. Like I said, the album came out in 1980, but growing up in Idaho on a small farm, we don't get new music. We
right away. Yeah.
There was no internet. We listened to radio and top 40 mostly. But when I heard this band, it was different than anything I'd ever heard. And obviously I fell in love with those 2 albums. I gave Boy a 7.3. It was the first album that we rated. I don't know, maybe if I was a little hard on that because it was the first album that we rated because it was their first album. I didn't give any of the songs on their album a 10. I gave quite a few 9s, but
you gave one 5.
The Ocean I gave a 5, and that was my measuring stick. I would, as we went through the other albums, if I liked a song better than The Ocean, then I would say, okay, it's got to be higher than a 5 or equal to a 5. If it was not as good as The Ocean, in my mind, it's got to be 5 or lower. So it was kind of funny how I used that song as a measuring stick throughout this process. But 7.3 for Boy. Some of the highlights for me, obviously, the famous ones: Electric Co., Out of Control, and I Will Follow. And when we went to see U2 a few years ago in Arlington, Texas, I believe it was I Will Follow, right? That they played that night, or was it Out of Control?
Oh no, it was I Will Follow.
It was
They would do a surprise,
yeah,
track
for their encore. They would play an old song, and for us, we got to hear I Will Follow, and that was pretty exciting, even though we were way up in the top of the whatever that place is. But yeah, 7.3 for me on Boy. Probably if I really sat down and thought about it more, I might give it a little higher rating, but I was actually kind of surprised Boy was my number 9. But that just tells you how good U2 are, that their first album, which was incredible for a first album for any band, to me is their 9th best album based on our calculations. So
it's hard to separate some of their earlier albums from another, not because they sound alike, but because they honestly can serve as companion albums, some of them. And that brings me to the album that I ranked equal to Boy, and gave it also gave it an 8.1, and that's their 1981 sophomore album, October. And when I was about 15 or 16, I learned to play the title track, October, on the piano. It was a beautiful, almost entirely instrumental song without very much lyrics, where Edge is playing piano, and it's a very melodic, beautiful song that serves, honestly, in my opinion, as the centerpiece of the album. There's other great songs on it too, like Gloria and I Fall Down, Tomorrow, and those are some very quintessential early U2 songs that really set in place what their sound is.
Even though they tied, why did you put October above Boy?
I think basically for the same reason that I gave one song on Boy a 10, and I gave one song on October a 10, but I also gave a lot of 9s, and it also has something to do with how much memorability I have, how memorable some of the songs on October are compared to Boy. Boy has a lot more deep cuts. October has a lot more songs that I feel like I can come back to. And that's probably got something to do with it.
Okay. My number 8 is Unpopular in our house.
Yes.
But it was actually a tie for 7 and 8. But I chose to put Achtung Baby at number 8, 1991. Very different for me. Just
yeah, this is a shock to the
again
senses.
After Rattle and Hum and Joshua Tree, to have Achtung Baby come out, and I mean, obviously the first track on the album hits you hard, and you're like, okay, I like it, but it's not what I was wanting. I gave it 7.6, right? 7.6, yeah.
Yes.
I will say one, obviously, I gave that song a 10. I mean, many will say that's the best U2 song. It's not my favorite U2 song. Obviously, it's a great song, beautiful song. Another song on the album that I gave a 9 to is Mysterious Ways. Very different. To see it live, I got to see the Zoo TV tour with my brother Sean and my friend, also named Sean. Of course, they played all the songs from Achtung Baby. They played a lot of songs that night. They played a lot of the bangers from the older days that I really enjoyed, but it was too different for me, I guess. Achtung Baby. So
we move on to, we're about halfway through the list because we are right now at our number 7 picks.
Number 7 for you.
Part live album, part studio album. It's Rattle and Hum, and that is their 8. I gave it an 8.3.
And it tied with this one too,
and it tied with my number 6 pick as well. Before we get to that, though, I just, a couple things about Rattle and Hum is, I guess you already know my dad started listening to the band when he was about 13.
Yeah.
I started listening to the band when I was about 16, 17, where I was in high school. Rattle and Hum is an album I don't come back to very often because of its length, because it's kind of all over the place. The album was recorded in many cities across the country, in Arizona, in Denver, and a lot of the songs on the album that make up the album are longer, more fleshed out, more experimental versions of songs that already existed, such as I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, which on this album includes a gospel choir backing up the track. They also did a version of Pride in the Name of Love, and did some other songs that were more personal to the band members, such as Bono's very passionate delivery of Silver and Gold. The Edge does his own lead vocals on a song, Van Diemen's Land, which they very much so tread the same lyrical thematic ground, colonialism and racial tensions on the album. There's very much a soulful, diverse sound across this entire album that was meant to feature the band traveling across the country for their tour for their 1987 outing, Joshua Tree. A lot of folk inclusions because of that reason, because the Joshua Tree, as we'll get to talking about, is a very folk rock album. This album, very much for the same reason. Bob Dylan is one of my musical heroes, and his influence is definitely felt across this album as he plays organ on some of the songs. You can definitely also feel the love that the band has for him and his influence. I did give 110 or 2 10s. One of them, the live version of Pride in the Name of Love, which in my opinion is better than the studio version that was on their 1984 album, The Unforgettable Fire, and All I Want Is You, which is a great closer, and it's the end credits song to the movie version of the album. It almost works more as a documentary than a live film, and I think that was a very interesting choice.
Number 7 for me was October. It was a tie with October and October Baby, so obviously I put October above October Baby. I'm trying to remember when I first started listening to October, because, like I say, the cassette that I had skipped over October and had War and Boy, which were obviously more popular albums, but October, the song itself, is a 10. I gave that one a 10. Gloria, I gave a 9. I do love a lot of the songs on that album, and there were no stinkers on that album for me. Like, the lowest I would give some song on that album was a 6. Just a beautiful theme in that album. Their most spiritual time as a band, where they were very much in the Christian scene at that time. Obviously, with a song like Gloria, Rejoice, Fire, they kind of had a theme. And then some of the concert footage I've watched, their old concert footage, features a lot of those songs from that period. So my number 7 is October, 7.6. Your number 6.
Well, that's interesting that we both picked October and tied it with another album.
Right.
So it's very much goes hand in hand with some of the other albums on our list.
Actually, both of our number 6 is the same.
Well, and if you had put, even though it tied with October Baby, if you put October above October or below October Baby, it would have also tied for 8. My number 6 pick is the band's Grammy-winning 11th album of the year, I believe it was. How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. Among fans, I believe it's a very well received album, but among the band, it's not a popular one. I believe Bono hasn't spoken favorably about it in recent years, but that was probably got something to do with it. It was a very trying album to make. It took several years before they finally found a producer that they meshed well with and began to, assemble a coherent track list. It's a good album. It's a good chapter in the band's discography, and it beat out a lot of very classic artists and very notable albums. And I gave no 10s on the album, but that's because there were many great songs that I gave a 9 to. One of them was the iconic opener Vertigo, which is very Strokes sounding. Some other great songs on it. City of Blinding Lights is an iconic staple of their live sets. the last two songs on the album, Original of the Species, which if some interpret it this way, is about Bono's children getting older. And I gave the album an 8.3. And
I gave it a 7.9. I think this is one of the ones that we were most similar on.
did we tie for this one?
Number 6 for both of us.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And I did have one song as a 10, City of Blinding Lights, just an amazing sing-along song that you can't help but sing along with on the radio or when they're playing it in concert. I think both of us didn't have anything less than a 6 on this album, so no wonder. It's a solid album with really good songs, some possibly great songs, but nothing that was like bad. It's one of those that you can listen to the whole album and not have a problem with, like, should I skip this song or not? Just play it and let it go, right? So,
And you used to do that. He told me that he used to listen to this album at work.
yeah.
And just, it's a great album to get you through the
Put it
day.
in, yeah.
Put a
Make time
smile on your face.
Make time go by a little faster. But
And my number 5 pick is one that my dad already talked about, and he didn't rank it so high. But now we are in the top 5, and my number 5 pick is Octone Baby, which I gave an 8.5. I believe it tied with my number 4 pick.
oh,
Octone Baby is an album that I've had to listen to. I've listened to multiple times. At one point, accidentally on shuffle mode. I think it put The Fly as the first song, and then Trying to Throw Your Arms Around the World is the number 2 song, and then one was number 2. It was a very interesting order to put the songs. And I think it's got something to do with, it almost feels like an anthology of, I think some would call them love songs, but none of the songs on this album really stick out to me as love songs. If anything, they're dark, twisted ballads that share some of the same qualities of previous U2 albums, where they can be have a very dark tone lyrically, but still have alternative rock sensibilities that put them on the map in the first place. One being an example of a very noteworthy song. Kind of like how I talked about with Songs of Experience, there are better versions of these songs that I think I prefer. I prefer the version of Zoo Station that Nine Inch Nails did for the compilation album of every song on the album was done by a different artist, whether it was Garbage or Depeche Mode or Jack White. But the 1991 version is still a very solid record with a lot of great songs. And I gave 110 on the album. So Cruel, which I believe is the closest you come to a real actual love song on the album, but it's about almost the end of a love or lack thereof, as the song is about how you can be in love, but the other person is still treating you very cruelly. And it's just like a lovesick. It's more of a lovesick song than a love song. And I think that's what has me so in love with the song.
I just gotta say, it's my wife Marcia's
Yes.
favorite probably album of U2 because of the time that she listened to it. And that's amazing how albums or songs can bring back memories or can remind you of certain times in your life. We had her rank it with us, and she gave it an 8.1.
Yeah.
You gave it 8.5. I gave it a 7.6, I believe. So I guess that we were kind of a little bit all over the place on that one. But again, it's really hard because in your mind you're like, maybe this is my second favorite album, but we kind of had to decide when we embarked on this ranking system if we're going to rank songs and then compile them and then average the song ranking to give us an album ranking. Like, what's your favorite album versus what is the best album based on your ranking? Based on that, my number 5 album is The Unforgettable Fire, 1984. This album will always be a memory to me because it was my first CD. When CDs came out, I was in high school, and I remember it was Christmas time, and I went and bought myself 2 CDs. Unforgettable Fire was one of them, and REM Green was the other one. So I remember couldn't wait to listen to it on my CD player. The quality was just that much better than a cassette. You didn't have the hiss sound in the background. You heard the music as it was meant to be heard in a studio. Now, I will say this about U2. Their studio albums are great, but to me, they're one of these bands that, like, to see them live or hear them live,
Yeah.
They're even better in person than listening to an album. A lot of people might say there are other bands that are the better live also, but I've also been to concerts where you hear the songs and you're like, oh man, I wish I was listening to the album instead of hearing them live, because they're just not as good, because maybe there's a lot of production or something that goes into the album that you can't translate into a live show. So I'll get off my soapbox and talk about the album, The Unforgettable Fire. Obviously, I had probably heard a lot of that music from the time frame of the Joshua Tree. So kind of right before the Joshua Tree gained its popularity. I may have been one of the only kids that I know of listening to U2, and Unforgettable Fire has so much meaning to me. I wrote the lyrics to A Sort of Homecoming on my desk in my government class in a pencil, I guess trying to be rebellious, but not so rebellious that I wrote it in pen, because if it needed to be erased, it could be erased, but nobody erased it. It just stayed there on that desk the whole school year.
Until we got rid of the desk.
Probably. On this album, I have given A Sort of Homecoming a 10, Pride in the Name of Love a 10, and also Bad, of course, which probably is my all-time favorite U2 song. The lowest rating I gave on that album was a 5 to 4th of July. All in all, I gave that album, what did I say? An 8. I love the melancholy theme of that album, the beautiful technological production of that album. It was just so clean and so crisp and beautiful throughout. The little tinkling sound that kind of U2 became known for. Very different than obviously War, was their previous album, which was more in your face, more loud, more rockin'. I think kind of the October U2 was more melancholy and mellow, but still amazing from start to finish. I remember I would talk to my government teacher and I'm like, you got to listen to these songs. They're talking about things that we're talking about in class. We're talking about Martin Luther King. We're talking about obviously 2 of his songs. And here she was, some 60-something-year-old lady from the Vietnam era. And yet when she listened to these songs, she's like, oh yeah, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. She didn't know who U2 was, but she loved that a rock band from Ireland would talk about things such as Martin Luther King. So just an amazing album. Well, I think we better move on, but I just
I'll be talking about that album later. But
yeah,
that was a Father's Day gift to you one year. So you own that album on
That's
CD
true.
and vinyl as well.
That's true. I don't know where the CD is
No,
anymore. I just listen, through YouTube Music or something like that. You're number 4?
Yes.
Both of our number 4.
Yeah, we both picked this album for number 4. It's the band's 10th album, All That You Can't Leave Behind, from 2000. This album resurrected the band and brought them back on the alternative rock train. They had just come out of their Pop Mart era, and this was the first in the new era for the band. I gave this album an 8.5, and I gave 110, and that's to their closing song, Grace. It's mostly, a smooth ride, and you get some weaker songs like Elevation, which I don't feel like matches the rest of the album at all. I feel like it's a standout track in all the wrong ways, where it's good song, not so great song, good song, good song, good song, good song, good song all the way through. Ends with Grace. It's almost got some elements of some sunshiny 60s music, especially with the song Wild Honey, which I feel like is an homage to the Beatles song on the White Album, which bears striking similarities to this album's cover. It's very stark, it's very white. It features the band standing in an airport terminal, and almost like they were reassessing where to go from pop.
This is, again, my number 4 also. What was similar about us on this one, you gave it 8.5, I gave it 8.3. I had 2 10s on this album, but not the one that you had a 10. I had Beautiful Day and Kite.
I almost gave that one a 10. That's a great song too.
Kite was a 10 for me. Gave out a few nines. The lowest I had on this album was a 6. So again, it was one of those albums that you just listen to it all through. It came out in 2000. You know, everyone was worried about Y2K and all this stuff, and it was just an exciting time to have something that wasn't like pop or Zooropa for me. It was like, okay, now we're back. We're back to what I love and remember about U2. Songs that have beautiful lyrics, songs that you can sing along to, whether you sing well or not. You're singing them at the top of your lungs in the car as you're driving, and can listen to at work, and nobody would complain. So that was something that I think we both agreed on, obviously. Number 4 for us both is All That You Can't Leave Behind.
Number 3 is an album that my dad ranked higher, and he's talked about already a little bit and in brief spurts. But honestly, before we did this ranking, this was my favorite U2 album, their 1983 album, War. And the reason why it's ranked so close, in my opinion, to The Unforgettable Fire is, again, the concept of sister albums. You can get 2 of the same thing in 2 different ways. It's almost like they contrast each other and they couple up good with each other. War is an album that is politically charged. It starts off with a bang. It's Sunday Bloody Sunday, which represents and references the political upheaval in the band's home country at the time, with the Troubles and the Falklands War. There was a lot of political things going on. Then we transfer into a song about how many seconds it takes before we all get blown to Kingdom Come in a nuclear holocaust. Seconds. It's a song that's played on U2X radio quite a lot, and they use that same interpretation of this is a song about the end of the world. And I think that was a shock, I believe it, to some, is, U2 is just supposed to be this good old rock band, a bunch of Irish kids playing. Now we're getting into more deeper territory and talking about life and death. And then you get to another classic song, New Year's Day, and a lot more political songs to follow, like The Refugee, Two Hearts Beat as One, which, if anything, is an anti-political song. It's about, if anything, trying to come together despite our differences geographically and politically. And you get to another great song that closes the album after that, 40. Well, not quite after that, but a little while down the line. That's the song that closes the album, 40. It's a great album, and I gave it an 8.7.
Well, it's not my number 3, and we'll find out what it is later on, but it's interesting that we both gave it an 8.7.
Oh yeah, we did.
Just foreshadowing
But
a little
we're
bit.
not tied. It's not tied at the same placement on the list. It's just the same rating.
Right.
Yeah.
My number 3 is Rattle and Hum. I gave it an 8.4. It doesn't mean that I like it better than All You Can Leave Behind or The Unforgettable Fire. It has a higher ranking. Interestingly, when we talked about Rattle and Hum, that has 2 songs on it that I didn't include in my ratings because they're not U2 songs. They're on the album, but they were not actually U2 songs. But I gave Rattle and Hum an 8.4. You actually had an 8.3, so we were very close on the ratings. On Rattle and Hum, I gave Silver and Gold a 10. I gave Pride in the Name of Love a 10. I gave Bullet the Blue Sky, one of my favorite all-time live songs that the U2 has ever done.
That's another one where the live rendition was better.
Right. I gave it a 10, and of course, All I Want Is You. That's a 10. One of my top 10 probably U2 songs, maybe not quite top 5, but very beautiful song. When I heard that they were making a movie, I think it was a Tuesday night, me and 3 buddies drove to Pocatello, Idaho to see it opening night. I know it was a school night and that we got home late, but we didn't care because we had to go see this movie. And it may not have been exactly what I thought, speaking of the movie, but I did love that movie. I had a copy of the VHS, but I think one of my friends had it and never got it back. But I've watched it with some of my boys and trying to show them the love that I have for U2. My wife would always say that was the time where she loved Bono's hair that long, kind of greasy looking, wet looking hair that he had at that time. This was a movie that my friends and I would quote from, just like people would quote from other movies. We would quote from Rattle and Hum. To me, when Bono sings live, the energy that he has is nonstop. The passion that he has as he sings these songs came through, especially on the live versions in the movie. And then, of course, when they got together with the choir in New York and sang I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, just the idea of blending together that choir and that it was still a great song. It wasn't just U2, it was them collaborating with someone else and making a different version, a reimagined version of a great song. So great album. Like I say, my ratings have it at 3. If I were gonna say, is it my third favorite album? Probably not, but based on my rating system, it's number 3 on my list at 8.4, Rattle and Hum.
We move on to number 2. My number 2 pick is The Unforgettable Fire, which is an album that my dad already talked about. I gave it an 8.8. He gave it an 8. And like I said, this is an album that before we did this ranking system was my favorite. I just remember listening to the album at school one day. I thought this was a great album. This was good. And then I bought the vinyl edition for my dad as a Father's Day present. And I remember listening to that crisp vinyl sound as the opening track begins. It just hit me in a completely different way. And I gave that song A Sort of Homecoming a 10. And Pride in the Name of Love is the next song on it. It's an iconic song. It's a classic. It's a staple of their live sets. Like I said, I believe, in my opinion, the Rattle and Hum version is the better version, but it's still a great song and a beautiful tribute to Martin Luther King. The better song on the album is, in my opinion, the closer, MLK. Very much like October, it's a completely instrumental piece with a couple of couplets from Bono, almost like Pride in the Name of Love and MLK are sister songs in the way that one of them talks about his life and legacy, and the other one is almost like an afterthought in reference to his death and almost like a eulogy. Another great song is Elvis Presley in America, which just like on Rattle and Hum, it's a song talking about how Bono was reading the unauthorized biography of Elvis Presley and was entranced by Elvis, at the same time disgusted by Elvis. And like many of the other songs on this album have this quality of painting like a pretty picture of America, and seeing as this was probably at the time their most Americanized album, they were branching out into a more wider audience and starting to come into their own. They'd already started to do shows in North America. At the time, their Red Rocks concert, I believe, had just taken place. They were starting to get themselves exposed to a more wider audience. And so they, on the album, decided to talk about topics such as racism, the dark history that America is known to have, and even some of the drug epidemics that were raging through the country, such as talked about on Bad. I believe Bad is a great song, but my personal favorite version is on Wide Awake in America. There's something about the bleak ambience of the studio version that just doesn't quite do it for me like how the version on Wide Awake in America does, with the tinkly, dreamlike quality. And that's probably what's keeping this album from me ranking it so high and just being a close second to ultimately what is my number 1 favorite, which we'll get into. But you can probably already guess. If you're a U2 fan, you can probably already guess what it is. But The Unforgettable Fire is still a magnificent album.
My number 2, probably kind of my introduction to U2 was Away in War. So my number 2 is War from 1983. I gave it an 8.7 ranking. Going into this, I thought that it would also end up as my number 1 album, because
So did I.
more than likely it's my favorite album. But based on a ranking system, it's number 2 for me. What can I say about War? I probably wore out that.
You probably wore out.
I wore out War. War. Like I say, growing up on a farm, that was kind of my release to listen to this type of music. Growing up listening to country music, I could appreciate country and those kind of things, but this was my real introduction to like something different. The British wave of what I ultimately really liked in music.
Gothic, punk, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and to think that, you know, U2 claimed that they were a punk band, sometimes I laugh about that, but speaking specifically about the album, probably my second favorite song, I guess you would say, Sunday Bloody Sunday. I gave a 10, New Year's Day as a 10, 40 for me as a 10. The lowest rating I gave on this album is a 6 to Red Light. Of course, listening to a cassette, you just listen to it, and then if you're lucky, you have auto reverse, and it turns it over and listens to the second side. I would listen to the whole thing, and then I would listen to Boy, and then I'd listen to War, and then I'd listen to Boy, back and forth. But of the two, I knew that I liked War better, just because it rocked. As much as Boy rocked, War rocked a little harder. And the meanings behind the songs, as Omar has discussed when he was talking about this album, makes you want to get up and do something. Listening to songs such as Sunday Bloody Sunday. I remember, to me, a kind of a thing I would do every year on New Year's Day was listen to New Year's Day. First thing, wake up, listen to New Year's Day.
Me too. A lot of radio stations will do that same thing. That's their first song of the new year.
Just wonderful. Like I say, 40, to me, that was what they closed out with 40. So these are the songs that made me fall in love with U2. And to this day, I will tell anyone that U2 is my number one band. As much as there are other bands maybe that are great bands, this is my number one band. Right. Well, if you've been paying attention, maybe by deductive reasoning, you know what our number one album is.
This is an album that I love, but I never thought I would make it my favorite U2 album. It could be maybe a three-way tie between this one, War, and The Unforgettable Fire, but my number one pick for this particular instance is The Joshua Tree, which is an album that also, up until How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb, also, I believe, won U2 Album of the Year at the Grammys after this particular album came out.
Yeah, so, I give it a 9.2. You give it a 9. That's right.
The album just barely, I think last week, had its 36th anniversary. As it came out in 1987, when the band was in their prime. This was their 5th album. They had established quite a name for themselves across the world. And like I said earlier, they were starting to develop a wider audience in the US. And so they wanted to make an album that sounded like basically a road trip across America. I mentioned Wim Wenders earlier, who's directed such iconic films as Paris, Texas, and Wings of Desire, which came out the same year The Joshua Tree was released. Bono was quoted as one time recounting a conversation he had with Wenders, which was about how when they were driving across the country, driving across the southwestern United States, scouting locations for the movie Paris, Texas, they had one cassette in their truck, and that was Boy. The album and the band's sound had left such an indelible impression upon the filmmakers that Bono was so honored that he and the band decided they wanted to also make, just as Paris, Texas was a film about bleak, sandy deserts in the southwestern US, they also wanted to make an album that came from that same school of thought. And so they painted and crafted a remarkable picture of an America that was soundtracked by Americana music, blues music, rock music, and it all came together as The Joshua Tree, which has so many not a bad song on the album. If I could give every song a 9 or a 10, I would, but I actually did give a couple of 8s. I gave an 8 to With or Without You, which is it's a great song, but it's a tad overrated when you look at some of the other songs that U2 have made. Another one is Tribute Through Your Wires, which is another great addition to the discography, but on the album it pales in comparison to some of the other songs. It's got a shameless Dylan-esque knockoff and a page straight out of the Rolling Stones playbook, especially when Mick Jagger on some of the songs would almost do like a mocking country hick accent on some songs like Honky Tonk Woman or Faraway Eyes. He would step outside of the British invasion Queen's English and go into just almost like a cowboy honky tonk voice. And I feel like this song was also kind of out of that same vein, where in trying to pay tribute to a certain sound, I feel like Bono and Edge and the rest of the band were it was almost mocking. And that's one of the few problems I have with this album. Other than that, it's great. Me and my dad got to see this album performed in its entirety live in Arlington for the 30th anniversary. It just stirred something in our souls to hear Where the Streets Have No Name, the quiet ascension into the song as the band members come out on stage that's shaped like a tree.
The videos were amazing too.
It was an incredible experience, and it's just as incredible to listen to this album front to back.
I gave this album a 9.2. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 songs on here as a 10. 1, 2, 3 9s, an 8, and a 7. You'd mentioned the Trip Through Your Wires. I mean, not that it's a bad song. It just, to be the worst song on an album and still be a 7. I mean, that just tells you the quality from start to finish of this album. I remember buying the cassette tape of this album, and I remember it had a smell to it, certain like, I don't know, like the plastic or the paper that it was printed on. And I can still to this day remember the first time I opened it and smelled that smell.
Wow.
And listening to it, I think the reason that myself and maybe Omar also wouldn't want to put it at number 1 is because so many other people liked it. But guess what? It was their best album. When people think of U2, hopefully they think of the Joshua Tree. That was the peak of their popularity, when I think, if I'm not mistaken, Time magazine called them the best band in the world. In my room, I didn't have posters, so I would cut out pictures of them from magazines and hang them up on my bedroom walls and things like that. But from start to finish, just an amazing album. To hear that album played in its entirety live, even though our seats weren't good, the video screen was huge, so even though we were far back, you could see everything very well. Some of my favorite songs are on this album, especially being played live. Exit was amazing. Exit probably wasn't one of my favorite songs until I saw it live, and just the way that they did it and kind of the meaning behind it at that time too. Mothers of the Disappeared is a song that has a lot of meaning to me, and to my wife. And part of the meaning behind this song, the Mothers of the Disappeared, refers to actual mothers who lost husbands or sons in Central and South America due to political issues or wars or civil wars. And when they sang this song live, the way they do it just was an amazing thing. So
the video imagery was very touching.
Yeah. Obviously, Bullet the Blue Sky, better version live, of course, but just an amazing song. I think With or Without You, it was a song that was just so good that everybody, whether they liked U2 or not, knew that song and liked that song. And so I think that was why when we started this exercise, I didn't think the Joshua Tree would be my number 1, but the songs are just too good. Like I say, I gave 6 songs a 10. And 3 more a 9. So that's 9 of their 11 songs on this album, or a 9 or a 10. I mean, do the math. It's almost a perfect album, the best that they ever put together. And again, the height of their stardom, I guess you would say. Amazingly, this is before social media and things would have made them even more popular throughout the world. But that's one thing about U2 is they are popular in South America, Central America, the US, obviously Europe, Australia, wherever you go, Africa, there are U2 fans. And part of it's got to do with the fact that what the things that Bono and others have done to help so many people throughout the world, to try to make change in the world, to make positive things happen, to do good. I used to work at FedEx, and one time I got an opportunity to speak to a guy named Dave Evans from Malibu, California, on the phone, who was shipping a package to Ireland. And I said, hold on a second, you're the Edge, right? Oh yeah. And so we had a 45-minute conversation. He talked to a U2 fan on the phone for 45 minutes, just about stuff, just about life, just about their music, just about normal, ordinary things. And they were normal, ordinary people. The amazing miracle that 4 boys in high school came together and formed a band that became the most popular band in the world is just a testament to their talent, their desire to form and create good music. It's weird to say that someone like Bono is a humble person, but in the end, I believe that he has just a person who wants to do good and be happy and to help others feel happy.
Well, I'll add on to your testament to just how impactful this band is. I haven't listened to them nearly as long as my dad has. I listened to some of their albums more than once, but not all of them. And don't let our opinions detract from your personal experiences with these albums. There are some albums in their discography that aren't as good as others in our opinions, but that's, you know, subjective. If any of y'all who are watching have some kind of personal stories about how U2 and their music have touched your lives, we'd love to hear about them. And I think we will go ahead and make this a series. You might see my dad again, or you might see one of my brothers and me discussing our personal takes on how we rank certain songs, how we rank certain albums by a certain band or a certain artist. We'd love to continue doing this in the future. And we appreciate all of you for watching, and be sure to subscribe and look out for more videos in this same vein. Long live U2. Long live music.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.